Sonic the Hedgehog, not to be confused with Sonic the Restaurant or Sonic Hedgehog, which is a necessary protein for the development of the brain, eyes, limbs, and many other parts of the human body. No, just good old Sonic the Hedgehog, the fastest thing alive. I've always been very fond of this character growing up, and with the recent popularity of the Sonic movies and current game titles like Sonic Cross Shadow Generations, it sort of made me feel nostalgic again. I've played a lot of the classic Sonic games growing up, especially the ones from the Sega Genesis era, with Sonic CD being my personal favorite of the bunch. But when Sonic made the true jump to 3D, and no, I'm not talking about 3D Blast, it was truly an exciting moment. To be able to freely roam around at the speed of light in an open world environment sounded incredibly fun. I'm talking about none other than Sonic Adventure. Now, from my understanding, the general consensus is that many agree it's still a great title. Sure, graphically it probably hasn't aged as well alongside the god-awful cutscenes and voice acting, but it's so bad, it's kind of endearing. And at its core, gameplay-wise, it's still a fun game. The version I owned growing up was the Nintendo GameCube version, Sonic Adventure DX Director's Cut, and unfortunately, like many other people, I got stuck on Big the Cat's missions and sort of gave up. I never really managed to see the final ending, but because I personally wanted to see if this consensus still holds true, I actually sat down for the first time in what I think is roughly 20 years and played it from start to finish. Safe to say, there's definitely a lot I want to talk about regarding Sonic Adventure, so make sure to stick around to the end to hear the full details. Since this was Sonic's first true jump to 3D, and it was a massive shift in comparison to the 2D Sonic games, I was curious about the history behind the development of Sonic Adventure. It's quite interesting. During the early 90s, Sonic's popularity was on top of the world, for it to slowly come to a halt after the release of Sonic and Knuckles in 1994. Series co-creator and producer Yuji Naka had grown tired from developing Sonic games, and since this was during the 5th generation of consoles, the Sega Saturn had only launched a few months later. Yuji Naka decided to step back and focus his efforts on other projects. Sega of Japan at this time decided to work on a unique Sonic game titled Sonic 3D Blast, which was released on Sega Genesis in 1996 and Sega Saturn and PC in 1997. The game was met with lukewarm reviews. At the same time, Sega Technical Institute planned to develop another 3D Sonic game titled Sonic Extreme. Development shifted from one console to another, and many other outside contributing factors around the game unfortunately led to its cancellation. And while we sort of got a glimpse of the future with 3D Blast, it wasn't enough. Gamers were not impressed. This was 1996, and simple 2D sprite games weren't cutting it anymore. Many other popular franchises like Mario and Super Mario 64 released the same year, and 3D Blast pales in comparison. And by 1997, the Sonic franchise had stagnated and reached a point where it was considered too safe. Sega and Sonic Team had to step it up, and development of a truly ambitious project of what we now know as Sonic Adventure began in April of 1997. Sonic Adventure would fully launch on the Dreamcast roughly a year later on December 23rd, 1998 in Japan, September 9th, 1999 in North America, and October 14, 1999 in Europe. A couple of interesting things to note here. Sonic Adventure and the Sega Dreamcast were both in development at the same time. It was meant to be a launch title for the new system, and this also meant that Sonic Team was able to influence certain aspects of the system's hardware, since the Sega Dreamcast was still in its planning stages. A goal of the dev team is that they wanted to push the game's graphics in high resolution as much as possible. I find that small bit of information to be insane, as they probably didn't even have a dev kit or anything, just roughly working on a game based off of hardware that technically didn't even exist yet. And this would also be the time that Sonic would get a slight redesign, as his look from when he first debuted from the Genesis era simply wasn't cutting it anymore. The team felt that his design was outdated and was long overdue for a change. Art director Kazuyuki Hoshino observed that other popular video game mascots at the time were achieving relevancy again by implementing indie music and urban street fashion as an influence to their design. The plan was to implement this idea within Sonic's new design. An internal contest within Sega was held, and a draft of potential redesigns for Sonic was created. Among many other Sega employees who worked on the concept art, the winner of this contest was none other than Yuji Uekawa, and safe to say, say they made the right decision. I also want to take a moment to appreciate something here. Look at this sick as, raw as, Sonic Adventure ass pose. This singular drawing of Sonic goes so hard and cemented the slick and effortlessly cool style of Sonic. In my opinion, I feel like current Sonic artworks don't even hold a torch to this Mona Lisa of Sonic artwork. Let me be crystal clear about this. The new artworks aren't bad, but they lack one very important detail: attitude, which I feel is one of Sonic's main characteristics. For example, take a look at this guy. You look at Mario and say, yeah, he looks like a nice guy. You look at Sonic and say, yeah, that guy's got f***ing attitude. The cultural impact in other forms of media when the specific pose is referenced is so beautiful. It's literally the pose I think of when I think of Sonic, and only he can look this awesome pulling it off. Now, let's talk about some actual gameplay. Quick note, while I do own a physical copy, and I could technically direct capture footage from this version of the game, I'm gonna go with the most accurate and definitive version to date. Now, hold on. Before you start running to the comments, don't panic. I'm aware of the numerous problems that the Steam version has. There's already a bunch of videos on YouTube showing why the DX ports suck. But thankfully, passionate modders have faithfully restored the Dreamcast elements via the Dreamcast conversion. So I'll be using this to showcase the game in all its janky 1998 goodness. At the end of the day, just play the game how you want to play it. Now that that's out of the way, it's time to boot the game up and play some Sonic Adventure. Wow, look at that CGI intro. Damn, look how fast Sonic is going. All right, let's play now. Jesus, what the fuck? That's loud as hell. Okay, well, to be fair, this is kind of a kick-ass soundtrack. Rush 40 kills it. Anyways, the premise of the game is that Sonic and his friends must stop Dr. Robotnik, or Eggman, at all costs. His main objective is to steal the Chaos Emeralds to feed a mysterious water-like creature named Chaos. These emeralds affect Chaos's physical state, which converts him into a larger, more menacing monster. There's 6 playable characters, each with their own unique playstyles that all essentially tie together to the very end to fully complete the game. You have Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, Big, and Gamma. Sonic is the first character you can play as, and you'll unlock the rest of the cast the more you progress. You start out at Station Square, which is basically the main hub world where you can explore around to play the levels. This was probably mind-blowing in 1998 to just freely run around and go wherever the hell you please. But sometimes it's possible to get lost or confused where to go, so thankfully there are these hint orbs that guide you on where to go. This orb is a plot character in the story, and I'll get to that in a bit. Sonic's level design is pleasant, and they're enjoyable to breeze through. In my opinion, I think he plays the absolute best out of all the characters, which understandably makes sense since, you know, this is Sonic Adventure. His incredibly fast speed, homing attack, and undeniably broken spin dash are all really fun to use. Even his light dash ability is satisfying against enemies. Just getting around with Sonic in the open was clearly designed to be fun first. Tails levels are okay, nothing crazy, and most of it is either just racing against Sonic to the end or some filler missions here and there. It honestly leaves a lot to be desired. He controls well, slightly slower, but his flying skills make up for it, especially when you get his unique ability that allows you to fly for longer distances. Knuckles' levels are solid. Using his glide ability to fly around and climb walls made the treasure hunting a lot easier. The sense of exploration is well designed. The emerald detector is also accurate enough that I didn't have much trouble finding the broken pieces scattered around. Although there was one instance where I think my game bugged out on the sky deck mission, and I had to break the game's wonky collision in order to complete the level, which, funny enough, I sorta had the same issues within some of Sonic's levels for some strange reason. Amy's missions are surprisingly fun as well too. She's no doubt the slowest hedgehog, but her hammer is satisfying to use. Even when you build up enough running speed momentum, you can launch yourself upwards and gain some massive height. Her levels are obviously a lot slower pace and really emphasize the more precise platforming, but it's a nice change of pace in comparison to the other characters so far. Also, I just like bonking enemies, it's fun. Gamma's missions are decent. It mostly feels like you're just pointing and shooting at everything without any real sense of purpose or direction. It just feels a bit mindless for my liking. I think the personal story of the character itself is surprisingly a little more interesting than the gameplay itself. E102 or Gamma becomes sentient after Amy shows the robot compassion, and in an attempt to break free from Eggman's programming, all of his levels revolve around destroying the similar variants of himself. So the narrative here makes up for the gameplay. Okay, now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Big the Cat. Remember when I said earlier that I got stuck on these missions when I was a kid? Well, here I am, 20 years later, replaying those same levels, and once again, I got stuck. And this time, I really sat there trying to figure out what I'm doing wrong. Now, I'm not against searching up a playthrough to figure out how to beat a level, and I am aware that the in-game instructions tells you how to properly fish, but that doesn't change the fact that I still strongly believe these are poorly designed and completely out of place levels in the entirety of Sonic Adventure. Let me explain in better detail. Let's look at the first level in Super Mario Bros. From the moment you spawn in, the first enemy appears, slowly creeping in, and you know in your gut, your instinct is to not touch it. Naturally, you'd want to jump over it. There isn't much trial and error here. The game has already taught you to avoid this, and with the simple controls, it's easy enough to figure out what to do. That's good game design. Big's missions are the complete opposite of that. You're thrown into these out of place levels where you're now fishing for some reason, zero explanation of how to fish, and the worst part, they're not even hard missions. They're quite possibly the easiest in the game, but you wouldn't know that without having the gameplay structured in a way that makes it easy to understand, or by, once again, going to the instructions on the game's main menu. Imagine if I had to go to the main menu in Mario to learn how to jump over a fucking Goomba. On top of all of this, Big's levels need to be completed since they're a requirement in order to see the final ending. You understand now why the consensus is that Big sucks. In my opinion, I don't care if they're easy. They're just not fun levels, and I wouldn't lose sleep if they were omitted from the game entirely. I'd rather they just keep his missions as side levels that complement the full game. Now, remember that hint orb I talked about earlier, the one at Station Square? Well, that hint is actually Tikal. Throughout everyone's story, Tikal plays a key role to the game's overall narrative. You'll get constant flashback scenes that depict her time as the guardian of the Master Emerald, and from my understanding, she has the ability to transport people to the past, which is what she does with the main cast, simply as a way to stop Chaos from obtaining the 7 Chaos Emeralds. Once you finally complete everyone's story mode, you'll get access to Super Sonic. This is basically the last level in the game. Chaos is fully morphed into perfect Chaos, and with the use of the emeralds, it's now up to Sonic to go against him. And, I shit you not, they literally use the power of friendship that transfers positive energies in order to change Sonic into Super Sonic. It's also the best use of Crush 40's song Open Your Heart. It's a very easy boss, but goddamn is it fucking badass to listen to this music while defeating perfect Chaos. Once you complete the boss battle, the game is finally over. For a game that came out in 1998, I'd say it holds up surprisingly well. Sure, there's a couple things that are hit or miss, but the important part is that it fully delivers on being a fun game to play. Well, for the most part. After completing Sonic Adventure, there is post-game content such as the missions, but these mostly feel like an afterthought just to give you an excuse to keep playing. There's also the Game Gear collection that allows you to play classic Sonic titles from the Game Gear system itself, although I don't know why they didn't just use the Sega Master System version of these games instead. And this was the first game of the adventure titles to include the Chow Garden, which is essentially a virtual pet simulator that allows you to grow and take care of your own personal chow. I didn't really mess around with the Chow Garden in the first Sonic Adventure compared to the second, where I felt it was a lot better, but the option is there. And that's basically the entirety of Sonic Adventure. I do hope in the future we eventually get a proper remake of this game. Not that I have a problem with this version, but I'm very curious to see how Sega would reimagine this title with current hardware. And I'm also curious to see Sonic return to the adventure style of gameplay, since many of the newer Sonic titles mostly rely on the boost formula. Lastly, we did eventually get a follow-up called Sonic Adventure 2, but I do plan on making that its own video and focusing on that game entirely, so stay tuned for that. What an incredible legacy Sonic Adventure has left behind, giving us the first true jump to 3D, a wide variety of characters to play, storytelling, voice acting, and the creation of what is essentially now current Sonic. Even if Sega likes to keep modern and classic Sonic split, at the end of the day, it's an incredible game. And I know deep down, it's definitely up there in the list of my top favorite video games of all time.